Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host Oscar. You can follow the show at MiamiPod on Twitter. TheMiamiPods.com is where you can find the iTunes. Oh crap, I've got YouTube open. So now I can hear myself talking. As you can tell, have not done a hangout for a while. All right, that seems to be done. Okay, we'll start again just for the podcast's sake. But anyway, hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host Oscar. You can follow the show at MiamiPod. TheMiamiPods.com is where you can find iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean links and RSS feeds, as well as Patreon and PayPal links if you would like to help support us. I'm joined by Ian Wharton, who you can follow at NFL Film Study. And if you haven't already, you can buy Draft Guide at draftcentric.weebly.com. And so this is coming straight after the last pick of the second day, the third round, last pick of the third round. And we're going to talk primarily about Raekwon McMillan, the Dolphins pick at number 22 in the second round, 54th overall. And then Tankersley Lee, the corner from Clemson, who was picked at 97. So I guess we'll just start with McMillan first. As you're higher on him than me, do you want to start off positively?
Yeah, sure. So I did not expect this pick, kind of like we talked about yesterday with the first round, kind of like the Reuben Foster discussion. The Dolphins did obviously meet with a lot of linebackers, and so that kind of hinted that they were going to take the position fairly seriously. But I did not see the value, at least the high-end value, and the potential major payoff in the first couple of years because Lawrence Timmons has basically a guaranteed 2-year deal because Kiko was just extended for long-term. With Koamisi, although you're not really counting on Koamisi, but at least his presence and then the fact that they have a couple of backup linebackers that fit what they want to do at a cheap price. I did not think that they were going to address the linebacker position so early. It is still a very high pick that they used it, but McMillan's a guy that I am high on. He's kind of been a guy that I followed since high school. He was a 5-star recruit that came to Ohio State, very quickly supplanted a fifth-year senior in Curtis Grant with the Buckeyes, and that was very impressive because Grant was a big recruit himself. He never really panned out due to injuries, but he was an athleticism guy, and McMillan was more athletic than him, like very quickly in his career. It was very obvious that he was a better player. So he kind of took over. Took over as well as like the leader of the defense, even as a young player. He definitely had more of like a leadership impact than Joey Bosa and some of the other defensive stars, like even like the secondary guys. McMillan's very well thought of as far as his character and his presence in the locker room. And he's super young. I think he's going to be like 21 years old this season. So he was a little bit
youngest player in the draft.
Yeah, so that would make sense. So I knew he was young. I didn't know he was that young. But so this is definitely a long-term pick, and it's an intangibles pick as well. So those things boded well for him. Comparison-wise, he was an easy comparison for me in like a Dante Hightower type, Lawrence Timmons type of player because he can play middle linebacker or he can play the strong side linebacker. I like him a little bit thinner than what he played at last year. He was definitely bigger, I think very visibly bigger on the field for Ohio State, and sometimes that showed as far as his sideline to sideline range, which I don't think is tremendous. He's not going to be that Hassan Reddick type of explosive athlete at the position. I think he wins pre-snap. I think he wins identifying plays very quickly, the direction of plays well. I think he's excellent at executing his role within the defense, especially when he is the force player, when he's kind of like the force linebacker. He's kind of establishing what else is going on for the rest of the defense, allowing the other players to kind of execute their roles. That's kind of been his strength at Ohio State, and they had the luxury of doing that at Ohio State because they had so much talent. But just a very solid overall player. You see some limitations physically. Again, he's kind of like that guy that's not going to be the super high producer as far as turnovers, but he's a good delayed blitzer. not a dynamic blitzer as far as like one-on-one battles, but he gets downhill quickly. He has good burst, and you kind of saw that at his combine, how he tested. And I think he can continue to improve that if he can kind of get into the best possible shape. I'm not saying he wasn't in great shape, but I think that the NFL will want him a little bit lighter, and I think Miami might want him a little bit lighter so that he can kind of go in between the strong side and middle linebacker roles, especially in coverage. But he's got tape where he covered backs out of the backfield. He has tape where he covered Saquon Barkley 20 yards on a wheel route. So this is an athletic guy. This is a guy that can make those plays. He wasn't exposed to it often. Now there are, of course, plays too where he would miss tackles, and you saw that he wasn't a great dip and explosion type of player at the position, and so that's why he fell into the second round, in my opinion, at least. But I think that if you're looking at this as a long-term pick and a long-term solution, it looks a little bit better. If you're looking at this as a first year or two, you might only be getting a guy who has 30% of snaps, maybe, in that range, 30 to 50% of snaps. Maybe you rotate him with Lawrence Timmons, but I think the goal is for Timmons to play more this year, and then you probably start feeding McMillan more snaps next year.
So in terms of the Timmons comparison, I think where they're vastly different is Timmons has got much more range in coverage, I think, whereas I don't think McMillan has much at all. I think he looks really kind of clunky in space. I don't think he plays up to how he tested at all. It's almost like the opposite of Harris, where you kind of forgive Harris's testing scores because on the field he looks really athletic. It's the same way Brent Grimes tested really bad at his pro day. He didn't go to the combine, but then you can see his athleticism kind of permeates through his game in the same ways. I think that's the same with Charles Harris, whereas the way in which McMillan tested, I don't think you see that on the field at all. To me, he's just a Sam linebacker. I don't see him playing middle linebacker, particularly because I can't really recall any times in which he has really taken on a lineman, although that doesn't happen much for Miami, or it shouldn't happen much for Miami with the scheme being all one gap with an underfront because of the nose tackle in Phillips. It does happen, and we've seen Kiko struggle with that. I can't remember a single snap where McMillan's kind of blown up someone. I know lots of people have said he's like a really strong tackler, and I think that's true when his head's up on someone, but in pursuit, I don't think he's a particularly good tackler, and he doesn't try and make plays on the ball at all. And I think that's a huge issue. Personally, I think that's where probably Kiko has his most value, is he makes plays on the ball and at least attempts to. And you see players like Rashad Jones, Cameron Wake, like even Harris as well, like their first hand movement is towards the ball. Whereas generally with McMillan, because of his limitations in space, generally when he's tackling in pursuit, he's just getting ankles. And I think he'll whiff on tackles as well in pursuit. Whereas you see when people say he's like, I think Greer said he's a tackling machine, and that's kind of permeated through draft Twitter or Dolphins Twitter as kind of like the buzzword for him. But I think that's only when it's a running back running towards him that he's going to hit hard. I think in a one gap scheme, like you can maybe get away with him as a middle linebacker, but you need kind of a really athletic guy next to him, and I don't think that's Kiko right now to make up for those coverage liabilities. And personally, I just see him as a strong side linebacker, and that's a 20 to 30% role. And I had him as a late third round pick, so to me it's a reach. I think there was far more impact players at safety that they could have taken and would have actually would have been on the field like every snap and had a far bigger impact on the roster, not only this year but the forthcoming years. Personally, I don't see McMillan really usurping Timmons at all in the next 2 years, and I mean, I think there's more. I just don't really see how you kind of can expand his role. And then Yeah, I just don't really see it with him. To me, he just looks like a Sam. And every single person's kind of expecting him to be a middle linebacker, and I just don't see um, anything other than that he like hits guys hard in the middle. I don't. I mean, I think he's instinctive enough, but again, you don't really. It's like he doesn't burst through gaps either. It's like I don't see what he has that's kind of like intriguing enough to um, or dynamic enough in his game. So like, what is the reason? Like, I don't know, what's the dynamic trait with him? You see,
Yeah, and that's the thing is I don't know that you have to get that position, and maybe that's just how I value it. I don't think you need to be dynamic at middle linebacker in the
but then I
NFL.
don't think he's good enough at everything either. Like, he's not enough of a well-rounded player. Like, if he was really good in pursuit and in coverage, then like that kind of mediates having no kind of defining trait.
Yeah, and I think that's for where we differ. Because I just think he's good enough there. I was just kind of looking at his numbers from CFB Film Room, which is a really cool resource. They don't track every team and every player because they're kind of building their staff, but they're a really cool
All the big
resource.
schools.
Yeah, basically a couple of the big schools at the and the big conferences. But basically, if you have time and you're willing and you want to get involved with football, this site's really cool. I don't have any stock in them. I really like what they do.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it's all free. And so I was just kind of looking at McMillan's stats. In 2015, he was a sophomore. He had 114 tackles, 10 missed tackles, 14 run stuffs, 2 sacks, 3 hits on the quarterback, 10 hurries, all attributed to him. 2016, he cleaned up some of that messiness, and I would agree with that on the film as well. 94 tackles, only 6 missed tackles, 19 run stuffs, 2 sacks, 1 hit, 3 hurries. Obviously, Ohio State was under Greg Schiano, so they weren't blitzing their linebackers nearly as much last year, dropping back in coverage and kind of taking advantage of the deep pass rush that they had. It was a little bit deeper last year than it was in 2015, even with Bosa. So just kind of interesting there. I think he did, and I would agree with that. I think he did clean up some of that stuff that you talk about, especially in pursuit. I thought at least there was progression, especially from a young guy. And so, I mean, we disagree on the evaluation, which is fair. But to me, it's a reach in terms of what you're going to get out of him right away. But long term, though, I really do like his fit in the middle of a defense. He's like a throwback middle linebacker but he's not like a Kendall Beckwith. Because like Kendall Beckwith, I think of LSU, we saw him go late round 3. Like that to me was what most people are describing that are negative about McMillan. To me, he's exactly what people are describing. Like, he is way too slow to play in coverage. He's a 2-down player for sure. Like, he has no hope of being higher than that. So for me, McMillan, if you're telling me like the difference, I think McMillan's much more dynamic. He definitely tested better than Beckwith would have, even with a healthy knee. And he's not even healthy. He has a torn ACL and he went late 3rd. So part of it too is for me is that like McMillan would probably start on like maybe 10 teams right now in the NFL linebacker. It's just a horrible position league wide. And so to me, that kind of boosts his value because I feel like he's just going to be a solid starter, even if it's like a Carlos Dansby type of role, which isn't like super great, but it's still something that like there's value in having that type of player.
Do you think him basically does he beat out? I mean, we even have to have the conversation. Does he beat out Koemisi at Sam? Or do they now like cut Koemisi, given he's having like a neck surgery? So I guess that's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, I know like they kind of sounded like they kept it open, like they were just kind of giving him the chance to come to camp. But I don't know that like that's the expectation here. I think that they're probably they have to be looking at this with more of a long view than just 2017 because
so that's why I kind of brought it up then. So do you even play him at Sam, or do you just have him sit behind Timmons? And I mean, the reality is probably like Kiko and Komisi are going to get hurt at some point. And so McMillan's going to have to play somewhere and maybe push Timmons to will and play, because I don't think you can play McMillan at all at will.
No, definitely not.
Whereas I think Timmons, because he has a bit more range, you can probably get away with that.
Yeah.
So then maybe that's kind of like the outcome with injuries. And maybe because of the injury history of Kiko in particular. That's why they felt they needed to get another linebacker. I don't know. I just feel like I can't really see where he's going to play a huge role. And that's partly because I just don't understand him as a player. I don't think. And I was even going to ask when everyone was kind of listing him in their kind of targets, it's like, can someone like explain like what he is? Because I just see like a smaller, just a traditional Sam. That's all I see with him. And I think that position is becoming more and more redundant in the league.
It is, and I think maybe the question is if you can't get Hassan Reddick, like the one or two, maybe like Hassan Reddick's in the league, or like the Tyus Bowser, in like if you can't get that type of player, you still have to get starters, and you still have to get players somewhere, and that's probably like a negative view on him. At least that has like a negative connotation on him. But yeah, I mean, like I said though, I think a lot more positively of him. I just don't see him being like I don't see there being a chance that he's like a bad player. Like there's just so many bad linebackers in the league, and like I'd rather have someone that is mentally much more there and much more consistent than like a Stephon Anthony who I have to teach to be consistent, even though he has all the traits. Because there's a lot of those guys that aren't even getting on the field, unfortunately. And I was a Stephon Anthony guy. Like I wouldn't even mind if the Dolphins traded like a late round pick for him. I'd still want to get my hands on a guy like that. But you know, and like I said, it's fine if we disagree. I do agree though. Like I wouldn't have picked. Like I'll say this carefully because I like the pick, but it would not have been my personal decision at that spot. I agree with you that I think you could have gotten more of an immediate impact and gotten a little bit better value out of that pick over the next 2 years, because I'm not sure in the next 2 years that he's going to hit really where you want to get, or at least maybe that you could have gotten at a couple other positions, especially guard.
Yeah, guard or I think safety are the two positions. Like, even if you don't like Obi, which it seems a lot of teams didn't, like Josh Jones, I think is like a really good player. And obviously Feeney went a bit later as well. And
heck, I mean Eddie Jackson's still out there. Marcus Williams kind of he went a little bit earlier than
he went to the Saints early. Yeah.
42 overall, so Miami didn't have a chance of him. But the safety class was a little weird. Justin Evans going 50.
That
was surprising. Yeah, he is good. He is good. I just didn't surprise that.
I didn't expect that. Higher than that.
Tease Tabor 53 to the Lions. That was really surprising. But yeah, I mean it's been kind of like a predictable draft up until the late third.
I think this is now where we're getting to like I think the drop off of this class was around the 70s. And so now I think we're seeing like just the tail end of teams' boards. And by the time when we get to the next Dolphins pick, that's going to be like priority free agents, really. At least grades for me.
Yeah, because I only went 200 deep, and I was starting to hit 6th and 7th rounders. So teams are obviously going to have, maybe even more limited boards than that. I mean, Delano Hill, Kenny Galladay, Chad Williams was a nice pickup for the Cardinals. But Jonnu Smith, Brandon Langley, CJ Beathard, that was shocking.
Yeah.
Those guys are UDFAs types. Galladay may be a little bit higher, but third round is pretty crazy. So, but the corners lasted. Jordan Lewis being drafted at all was a little bit surprising to me, with his DV case potentially, not being as settled even as Kerryon Conley's. Cameron Sutton went right before Miami, which was interesting because I thought to myself, if Tankersley's not there, then I think Sutton might have been in the conversation. So, I mean, there's still some good talent out there, and we'll get into that. But kind of with like how the board fell after McMillan, it kind of got a little zany there towards the end.
And the Dolphins still got 70 picks until the next pick, so.
Yeah, they got quite a ways. Yeah. But they got 3 of them, so.
Should we move on to Tankersley, or is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. Did you ever feel like they should have traded up at any point?
I don't think they. I mean, unless they could have used fifth round picks, I don't see why teams would take a fifth rounder really.
Yeah.
Particularly in this draft, it would have to be maybe a future pick, and then again, yeah, I don't know why a team would do that. I mean, I would have tried to trade up, thinking like you could get Obi, but then he fell to you, or Feeney, and then he fell to you. Maybe I would have tried to get up if I really did. If there's something about Obi off the field or wanted more of an instant impact, I'd have maybe tried to get ahead of the Bucks with Justin Evans because I think he's really good.
Okay, yeah.
Or Sidney Jones maybe, but that's probably a bit too far. I don't think you can really justify that.
And that one too, yeah, he went a little bit earlier than what I expected, and maybe their evaluation of his medicals could have affected that. So that, the medical stuff is always a little bit difficult.
I think for me, like that, I was happy with the players that landed at that pick. So I don't think you really had to go up like Awuzie, Josh Jones, Obi, Feeney. I think like you're pretty content with like picking from those four players, or like Motton if Feeney doesn't pass the sniff test with the concussion stuff. Weatherall if you don't like Awuzie, or you're looking for more than a nickel. So I think they had plenty of options. For me, better players in more valuable positions, more dynamic talents than McMillan. But that's just my evaluation. Do you think it's going to be easy for him to lose some weight and still be able to? Do you think it will like have any negative impact losing that weight at all?
I don't think so. I mean, I think just in general, he's a pretty firm tackler. I like, for the most part, I like his tackling effort. I like his form in general. I am interested. I mean, he's just so young too, and that's part of it. He's, if he's 21 years old, there's going to be some growth. There's going to be some growing that's going to happen, whether it be just him physically being capable of being a little bit more rocked up at a lower weight, or just carrying that type of muscle. So that's going to benefit him. You kind of can't tell how these guys' bodies will develop, but I mean, I would consider that a potential positive. So I don't see a negative really, just because he's a thickly built dude naturally. Like, he always just looks bigger. And maybe that's something that he just can't even overcome. Maybe he can't get back down to that weight too. So that's something that I don't think we'd ever get an explanation on, but I would be interested to hear if we could ever like get that type of information.
I guess the one positive I'd have in terms of the way he's different to the current linebacker core is he's slightly more patient and more reserved. And I think that's partly because he's never had the explosion of either Kiko or Timmons in their past, so he just doesn't try and shoot those gaps as much. And so he's a bit more considerate with how he applies himself. So I think that's like a nice thing, but or just like a difference for Miami. But I don't think that's it might just make his liabilities I see in coverage maybe are slightly helped by that patience, so he's going to be less likely to be out of position. But yeah,
you'll probably like their other linebacker next year. Then you'll probably like Jerome Baker a lot. He's a little bit more of an athlete, a little bit more aggressive like that.
Because I mean, like if you could put, because I mean, just like, I guess like McMillan mixed with Shazier is like the ideal kind of modern linebacker, right?
Yeah.
But it's like you need to have some of that Shazier-ishness, that dynamic quality, ability to get sideline to sideline, that I think McMillan lacks. And the sideline to sideline bit is like pretty much the crucial part to be able to be a free down player. And that could be like a question whether he has to come off a nickel. If he does have to come off a nickel, like base is becoming a 1 down role, no longer 2 down. But are you comfortable with him as like a 3 down player?
Yeah, I mean, I am right now. I wouldn't use him as the primary coverage guy. I agree. I think you would want a little bit more of a flexible coverage guy than him. Obviously, he's not gonna if he's the most explosive guy in your unit. That would not be ideal. But I am comfortable with him on the field though. But yeah, like he's not like Timmons in his prime, where like Timmons in his prime was in like covering slot receivers and stuff downfield. Like you don't. I don't think he's like that. I think he's a little bit more like not a bad version of Timmons, but just like a little bit older version of Timmons. Not even like 2016, like probably like 2015, where like he was good enough to hold his own, but not like a dynamic guy. But that's why he went where he went though too. Like if he was a dynamic guy, then he would be on
Yeah.
way higher. So
Should we move on to Cordray Tankersley then, the corner out of Clemson? Like long, raw, can run fast in the line, but pretty like stiff body. I guess to me, like at least he has a pretty like a pretty outstanding trait in his ball skills. Um, what's your thoughts on Tankersley as you're the quarterback guru over at Bleacher Report?
um, so I have him as my fifth corner in the class. So I really liked his value where he went. He did not test extremely well outside of his 40-yard dash, but that's okay. I didn't expect him to be like a super explosive guy. To me, he's a press corner, or he's going to be an on-ball corner. You're not going to play him off coverage, I don't think, too much. Just because his comfort level is so much, it's clearly so much more comfortable when he's lining up over the receiver, and he can just mirror the receiver. At 6'1", 200 pounds, I think he moves pretty well, even despite not having great measurables at the combine. So kind of like my strengths that I had and to me, like it's pretty normal for schools to like just kind of recruit replacements for players. And I thought he was like the clear replacement for Bashaud Breeland as a prospect too. And Breeland hasn't been great in Washington. He's kind of been up and down. So like I don't think he was like a guaranteed like pick, but I do have him as like a second rounder, actually a high second rounder. So 28th overall player. So I think he's a pretty solid prospect. But my strengths was that one of the best in the class at using his length at the line of scrimmage, staying with the receiver on short routes, initiates contact early and press and mirrors well. Wins at the line of scrimmage with his strength and footwork. He has the ability to challenge receivers to break his press is great, and physically continues to the catch point to break up passes. Much better finding the ball in zone coverage. Really more on ball. Looking at more on ball with that statement. Doesn't give too much cushion when he does this, allowing him to break downhill on underneath routes. Maintaining position on deeper routes is something that he does well. So he doesn't really sell himself short, really, in terms of giving up deep positioning, kind of protects himself in that regard. That's going to fit well with Miami. That's kind of what Miami had Xavier Howard do as well. They didn't want him to give up big plays. It's kind of what Tankersley is used to. I like his – I know that they mentioned this on TV, and I had people asking. I like his effort and his finishing ability in the run game. It can be – I mean, I could say this for most corners. Corners are either like they really don't give a shit, or
He throws his shoulder in.
yeah, he's aggressive. He's going to try, and he might whiff though. Like he's not. I'll say this: Xavier Howard is a much more consistent and a much
He's
more
more like Bobby McCain, where Bobby will
yeah.
fly in and sometimes he'll hit and sometimes he won't.
Yeah, but the mindset is there, and that's a constant with Miami's corners. They want that aggressiveness, and that's why he fits really well. So and part of this is just the exposures that you get, and maybe Mayock and DJ and them, maybe they saw different games. Maybe they overvalued. I think someone was mentioning the Florida State game was a game that they were mentioning on TV. So sometimes you overweigh one game, because I know in the games that I saw, I didn't really notice a guy that was trepid or didn't want to get involved like that. So weaknesses, he didn't get a ton of targets, and that was a constant for Mackenzie Alexander too. That's going to be an adjustment. I do agree with you. I think that his ball skills when he is playing on ball are very good. I think when he's starting to get away from the line
In
of scrimmage,
trail, it gets ugly
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, exactly. And that's despite his length. So that's something that I'd like to see improve, especially with his length. He likes to get grabby on
Yeah, he
downfield
is
routes.
Maxwell's.
Yep. So that's going to be, that's going to be the key. And I think that that's ultimately going to be what kind of determines where he goes and how quickly he can ascend a depth chart is how grabby is he going to be when guys start to get a step on him. Um,
I think he needs kind of a lot of work on. I mean, he's obviously has some limitations physically in his lower body, but I think he kind of looks like an Alabama corner in terms of back pedal and hips. Like it looks like he doesn't know how to um, drop that hugely well in the back pedal. Like it's a new thing to him, um, and that sometimes shows in like his loses balance quite easily, and his footing just looks a bit like clunky and not very graceful. Um, so I think that's like an area that they'll have to refine. I guess like the positive with this is maybe not like he's going to have time. He's got a year behind Maxwell. Again, his position at Miami seemed to always have injuries at, but I think the kind of the timetable for him will be have a year, and then once Maxwell goes, it'll be him challenging likely another pick, maybe Leopard if he's still around for that second corner opposite Xavier Howard. Is that kind of what you envision? The kind of the route of this pick going?
yeah. Let me ask you this though. How quickly do you think he's going to challenge for playing time?
I think it'll take a year unless there's injuries. I think he'll be ahead of Lippett. I don't think he'll challenge Howard, and I don't. I mean, maybe because of the way they treated Maxwell last year, maybe they'll bench him just out of like they lose a game or something and assign blame to Maxwell, and maybe he gets benched again. But I don't think they would play him out of choice
Okay.
necessarily.
Do you think he's just that far behind on Maxwell, or do you think it's just where he was
Yeah,
drafted?
I think Maxwell was the best corner, the Dolphins last year, and so I don't
Oh, I'm sorry,
see
not Maxwell, Howard. I'm sorry.
Howard. Yeah, and I
Sorry,
think they've invested so much in Howard, they don't want to try
don't want
and
to be wrong.
slow down that development.
Okay.
And then they
Okay.
probably want to like strip out a bunch of stuff out of Tankersley and like regrain it, particularly his lower body. So maybe they just work on that and get him into uh, like learning off Maxwell, because I guess there's similar types of games, um, and then especially with the history of Burt coming from at least a tiny bit of the Bengals, I could like see Tankersley being like a Bengals like corner that they would spend a year or so, but generally the Bengals will draft them in the first round and then bench them for a year. I can imagine the same kind of approach being used for him
Okay.
and it being beneficial.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it would be beneficial. I think he's better than Xavier Howard. But Miami's probably going to like you said, they're going to favor one. They're going to like his run defense since it is very consistent and it is a very high level. He's definitely one of the best run defending corners that we saw last year. So that's going to be a positive in his favor, and he is higher invested, and now he has a year of experience. So that inherently is going to favor him, not even just from like the Dolphins' perspective, but just from like a developmental standpoint, that should help him. But I do think Tankersley is better than Howard, especially in coverage. So I am interested to see how much of a chance he gets to actually earn playing time, because I definitely think he's above Lippett. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean that's not hard though.
yeah, but so that to me is the best part of this pick, and we kind of talked about that. Is you had to add competition to Lippett, and you had to add competition for the future of Maxwell's position, because you didn't want to just hand Maxwell's position to Lippett if anything happens. So now they've got a legitimate prospect, they've got a good one, and we talked about this corner class too. I don't think outside of Lattimore that there was going to be like another high end one type of corner. And I think Tankersley's kind of in like that same, number two type of corner type role. So he's going to get beat. He doesn't have great athleticism. There's definitely flaws there that are going to hold him back on some level. And you talked about some of those physical limitations. We saw that at the combine. So that's exactly what we had seen at the combine. So that kind of follows it nicely.
I think he can play like quite well against bigger bodies. Like I think the Virginia Tech game, he played really well against Hodges.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a promising thing. Is like as someone who can play up to size well. I rated Howard quite a bit higher than Tankersley, but I think I'm an outlier on Howard. It seems. Do you think his drafting has kind of any impact on how we could see the coverages change in Miami, or do you think he kind of fits in quite naturally and maybe just play a little bit more press?
Yeah, I would just have him on ball more often, but I don't think it'll be a huge change for him because I mean, in general, I think that if they're going to view he and Howard as like the future, I think those guys are pretty similar as far as what they need to do alignment wise.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're similar in types of body type, but then like Tankersley is just a straight line speed guy, whereas Howard is a bit more not as good straight line speed, but slightly better lower body and like hops and stuff has been particularly in testing. So although they have like similar bodies, they are like different types of athlete or different types of human. If people would try and say Tankersley is an athlete, though, I mean, you're just calling every single football player an athlete then, because they have one redeeming feature that is athletic. He's not an athlete.
Yeah, unfortunately, he didn't test great.
No, he's like just like passable, like average athlete in the same way as Harris is, and like McMillan tested like an above average athlete, but I think he looks like an average athlete on the field.
Yeah,
personally. So yeah, they're not looking for athletic specimens, or not in this draft anyway. Is there anything else on Tankersley you wanted to mention, or like impact of the defense as a whole with him in, like how it changes linebacker roles, or whether you need to have a bit more range at linebacker because of like you might be playing more cover two?
I mean, I think it just fits the same archetype that they've been getting.
They do need more range at linebacker, but
yeah, I mean, it's they've been in a tough spot because I don't know who else they could have acquired. It's not like they had like the chance to get like Jared Davis or, it's not easy to get those guys unless if they would have moved up to get them. And I think those are lesser football players. I think they're just better athletes. So
I mean, that's
part of
like
it's
Cunningham. I didn't particularly like either. Like I didn't really like any of this off-ball class.
yeah.
I mean, I think Davis would have been maybe interesting, but he obviously fell quite a while. No, sorry, Willis would be interesting, but he obviously fell quite a way, and then that's like a weird position move as well. That's still kind of like having to be relatively bold. Or you could have just got a safety, play Rashad as a weak side linebacker and feast, but they're never going to do that. Should we move on to then third day picks?
Yeah, sure.
So the Dolphins have 3 picks in the 5th round, the 166th pick, the 178th pick, the 184th pick, and then a bit of a wait until the 223rd pick. So for me, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to have anyone with a draftable grade. Is there anyone that you can envision falling 70-odd picks that could have any sort of impact, whether special teams or as like a solid backup that in a pinch could play? Because I think that's like the most we can kind of expect, or like in 4 years could be interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe you'd look at like some specialists, maybe like a slot corner, guy like Jalen Myrick, maybe it would be an opportunity. Not Brandon Wilson, the other corner from Houston, the guy who tested really, really well. Not Howard Wilson, the taller guy, but Brandon Wilson could be like another slot opportunity. I don't think that those guys would beat out McCain, but they could at least challenge him because you're going to. I would at least want to add some slot capabilities there.
I guess that's what we didn't talk about. Tankersley, do you see him playing the slot at all?
No,
No.
And now Miami has 4 outside corners and 1 slot guy. So unless if they consider Lafayette Pitts maybe an option, but so I mean it's not a huge deal just because slot is super undervalued, but it is something to consider maybe with one of those 5th round picks. Looking at, I would probably want to add a guard, but I don't know who's really going to be there.
I think they're just going to probably take a bunch of like tackles, I could imagine.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really look at many interior guys other than Goga, who's terrible, the Vanderbilt center, that in that kind of range. But tackles like maybe Skipper, the like massive guy from Arkansas, or Tebby.
Will Holden would be interesting from Vanderbilt. He was a tackle. I think he'd be really interesting. He tested really well. Elijah Lee from Kansas State. I wouldn't mind adding him as a backup linebacker.
Yeah, I think they had a meeting with him at his pro day, so that's kind of an option. Yeah. One thing to note on every pick so far, the Dolphins have had it in for some sort of pre-draft meeting.
Yeah.
So the trend continues. So we've got that list up. Is there any names on there that kind of at a position of need, or that kind of like William Likely maybe, talking about that slot corner?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking through that list now. I would be Dylan Cole. I'm really interested in. I would love for them to pick up Dylan Cole with one of those 5th round picks. I just think that he's like the quintessential guy that you draft in like the 5th round as like a priority free agent grade. Danny Isadora is interesting, just as like a backup guard. I don't think he has a future as a starter, but if you just want to add depth, at least I'm familiar with what he brings to the table. So like my ideal guys, I think in the 5th round, I would love to take Dylan Cole, Will Holden, and man, I would love Ryan Switzer. I don't know if it's realistic, but I love Ryan Switzer.
The Western Oregon tight ends may be interesting, Avgi, but I think he's probably like a free agent. Orion Stewart is kind of interesting, the Baylor safety, but again, I think like it's hard for me to like suggest drafting any of these guys, because maybe Devin Chappell, the Oregon State safety, I think he's probably in that kind of range. It's just really hard where it's like almost 2 draft classes away, like 2 rounds away. The next pick, it's like hard to kind of predict anything. I did have a question about Jaleel Johnson and how he would fit. I don't think he falls that far, but if he were to, would you be interested in him? Because like, there's clearly still need as like a 3rd defensive tackle.
Yeah, I would actually be an enormous fan of that. That's actually what I was thinking with the Tankersley pick, is that if they don't take Tankersley, Jaleel Johnson was the guy that I would want them to take. And Johnson is traditionally the guy that the NFL lets slide really far, because he's just a gap eater. He's just a guy you stick in there as a 1 tech and just have him eat 2 blockers, and he's going to do a really good job in run defense. I would be super stoked if he was in there in the 5th round. Even if they could even package all 3 of those 5ths together.
Yeah, I was just about to
move up for him, I would do that. He's probably the only guy left on the board I would say that about too. Him and Eddie Jackson. Those are the 2 guys I would target in a trade. Everyone else, I'd probably just hang back and take my highest grades at the point.
Would you go all 4 picks to get up somewhere in the 4th, or do you think that's...
No, I would. I would, because I don't. So like for me, day 3.
Anymore.
Yeah, for me, day 3, like I don't see. If I'm taking 4 guys, I don't think 3 of them are making the roster. You're probably going to sign 2 or 3 of them to practice squad. Even in like the guys I mentioned, I don't. Maybe Will Holden makes the active roster.
Maybe a Jordan Leggett, like as your 4th tight end.
Yeah, he's interesting. I'm actually, I forgot he was out there. So I mean, there's guys out there that could make it, but I would probably rather just have 1 really good player, especially if it's a guy like Jaleel Johnson. Like that would be a really nice pickup. I have him as like a 2nd round value, so I think he'd be a high end impact player for the 30-40% of snaps he plays.
And definitely a position of need for Miami. And he has like some sacks under his belt. He's not just a run stuff. He's got like some quickness to him.
A little bit, yeah.
And he would definitely help the linebackers. Because there's one thing that like we don't really talk about in terms of like offensive linemen getting to the second level and linebackers having to like either get off that or like evade that. It kind of helps if the defensive line can slow down that combo block going up to the second level, which we haven't really had in particular with Phillips, because most teams will combo Phillips if they can.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point too, and that's something that's hard to evaluate in college at times, because some of these linebackers, like they're playing at such good schools that like you don't really see that too often.
Yeah, that's like with McMillan, like
yeah, he was playing with
you see him
awesome
take
players.
on like he's always clean in the middle.
Yeah.
And then that's why he can be patient as well, because he doesn't need to fly through the like a gap to make a tackle, because he can just wait for the tackle to come to him. So the only times you really see him engage with an offensive lineman or a tight end is when he's playing that contain player. And then that's a slightly different like technique. That's not just that's trying to play leverage, not just make a guy miss. So there's just like question marks about him for me, but there's like things you just haven't seen much of.
Yeah, and that would be something that would definitely help him out. Like getting Jaleel would help out Kiko for sure, especially as like the backside rusher. Like that would so Kiko would be, if they're still going to do the 4-3 under, he would be on the right butt cheek of Jaleel Johnson's alignment. So like that would directly impact him like a lot of the time in base formation. So like that would be something that you want to maximize your players. And so that would definitely help out Kiko too.
With Eddie Jackson, what do you think he would challenge for a starting role, which I don't think is a particularly hard thing to do next to Rashad?
Yeah, I do. And like you said, part of it's not that hard, but it depends on his leg and how healthy it is. Maybe it's not fully healthy because we haven't seen him taken yet. It surprises me that Evans was taken at 50 and we're at 107 and a similar player in Jackson, but that's a guy from Alabama too. So like Alabama guys, even though there was like 9 of them drafted, a lot of them had injury concerns. So something to consider on that. But yeah, he's a guy I'm definitely interested in.
And he's like done some returning. He has like some special teams value. Has played corner as well. Although they have a tendency to kind of move those hybrid guys to the thing we think they shouldn't be. At least with Akins and with
Lucas.
They've kind of done the opposite of what we would naturally think they are. Even with Lippett, for me, I think Lippett's a wide receiver still. Is there anyone else on that list that, considering so many of, or all their picks so far have come off, and this list of 66 players, 65 players? I guess like Stacey Coley could maybe be like a camp body if they went for a wide receiver. Or would you prefer like a Switzer or
I prefer probably like a Switzer, but really it's just Switzer. I like Ishmael Zamora too, although he might be a free agent. I would have liked Chad Williams, but obviously he went earlier than what I expected. But I like the physical freaks. I like the guys with like, if you're going to take a guy day 3, it either needs to be a very specific role and a high performer or a freak athlete. So like that's going to be my bar for day 3.
William likely would be interesting.
Yeah, I just think you're going to be able to get him for free.
Yeah.
That would be, but with that late pick,
you may as well just guarantee it instead of
exactly.
to go into the
like,
draw.
I don't think there's any reason in like arguing about like day 3 picks unless
Jalen Myrick is kind of interesting.
Howard Wilson. I would totally understand risks on like Myrick, especially because he's kind of unique as far as like his speed and his size, because he plays like an outside corner, but he has the size of an inside corner. That's just kind of unusual for a guy his size. So like he can play though. He's a lot better than what I kind of expected going in, because I only added him to my list because he ran that 40, and then I was like, oh wow, like this is actually like a legit player. So he impressed me. But
And I
Yeah,
think
I'd be happy with that.
they can get away with more depth at corner. I think that's one position that
Yeah, you can't have enough bodies
yeah.
there. You really can't, especially with 4 outside corners now. Um, Guy like Cornelder, I'd be happy with that. I don't think he'll fall that far, but fifth round, absolutely. Like that's a no brainer to me. They could add just like a number of these guys that just they make sense.
So there's Caleb Brantley, who apparently has been recently arrested on a battery charge. I think we both have him as like in the top 2 days as a prospect, the free technique out of Florida.
Yeah.
Given we know nothing about the charges, would that be kind of a play you would put like a late round pick on, or do you just wait to see how everything clears? Is there any other defensive tackles other than Jaleel Johnson that you're kind of interested in?
Yeah, I think a guy with like that sort of incident, it kind of reminds me of like Michael Bennett a couple years ago, a guy that we liked more than what the NFL did, and he went in the fifth round, partially due to injuries, but also just those three techs are just kind of everywhere, and Brantley has that incident kind of hanging over him, whether it's serious or not. Definitely doesn't seem to. It seems to be trending in the right direction in the press from what we've seen reported, but I think you're probably going to be able to get him for free as a UDFA. And again, if you take him as a pick, it's fine, but teams, and especially the Dolphins, seem to be valuing character a little bit more right now, just like with like the last couple of signings that they've done and picks. Like, has this and like, this is a legit question, I just can't think off the top of my head, has this regime since Greer took over signed a like quote unquote character risk besides Tunsil? I mean, but that's
Yeah, Tunsil, I guess.
yeah. So I mean, that's about it though, right?
I mean, it's
TJ
hard
McDonald.
to tell what the I guess like
It's a loose term.
yeah, and like how long has Greer been here? He's been here for like 15 years.
Yeah.
So
because I guess my only point with that was we haven't seen anyone with like a DV incident.
and generally, like we're seeing kind of with the Raiders, as an example, is like you'll wait like 3 or 4 years to like try and build some sort of trust, or like trust in your locker room before you start adding those players.
Yeah.
So maybe
it seems like they do though. It seems like they are getting that trust. Like it was kind of funny. Kenny Stills tweeted at Raekwon McMillan. Raekwon McMillan tweeted something like, "Chilling on the beach in Miami, or I'm gonna be chilling on the beach in Miami," and Kenny Stills tweeted back at him like, "Not like, no, dude, we're gonna be grinding down here." So it's, like it does seem like their strategy this offseason definitely seems to be building a culture down there. Whether it was an expensive culture that they kind of bought or not, at least it's a culture that seems to be taking to this point.
Is like a Dietrich Wise interesting to you? Kind of like the five technique out of Arkansas.
I do. I like him. I like him as like a power edge. He's fun. He was a little bit better than what I expected to going in.
I guess if they were to pick him, you'd kind of assume they would be using more of like a traditional five technique in the 4-3 under that we didn't really see last year.
Yeah.
So that would kind of indicate some sort of change, or maybe just like a camp body to give them 3-4 looks going through preseason.
Yeah, that would make sense. I also wouldn't mind like a Joe Mathis. He's falling because of injuries. Carl Lawson's still available. I wouldn't mind trading all those picks for him. Apparently he was red flagged for his hip, which totally makes sense. I mean, I think everyone expected his injury issues to be harmful in this process, but still someone that I have with a first-round grade, so I like him.
Anyone else, or should we bugger off?
No, I mean, a lot of these guys are going to be guys that had injury concerns, and I don't really factor that stuff in. So,
or just special teams players,
or special teams, yeah, backup, practice squad type guys. So,
is there any like? I guess I think they're pretty good for like vice guys and like core cover guys. I can't really think of any like particular area that I think they really need in terms of special teams with like Michael Thomas Akins. Hull, Hewitt, I think they're pretty good for everything.
Maybe they'll view receiver. They worked out a lot of late round receivers.
Yeah, because Caru's not. I mean, Carew played like 100 odd special team snaps, but he's not particularly great at it.
So maybe that's who they'll use maybe one of these picks. I'm not out here grinding wide receiver special team tape, but maybe because like Ishmael Zamora definitely didn't play any type of special team, so maybe like a Teldrick Morgan, maybe Coley. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're putting Coley out there, but yeah, those are the type of names. Shaquille Griffin went a little bit earlier than what I expected to.
I kind of had him in that range. I think I had like a bunch of those corners all in the same area.
Yeah,
so that kind of made sense. Like Tankersley was actually at like the end of that. I think like going into day 2, he was like the 7th corner for me.
Okay.
And that's partly just because I think I just really like the other corners. I think they had more than one like positive trait where I think Tankersley is a bit more of a project than the rest of them.
Yeah.
Do you have a comp for Tankersley at all?
Yeah, I went with Bashad Breeland.
Okay.
Same school, same role, so it was easy.
I think Lance Zerline had Drake Kirkpatrick. I thought that was interesting. That one kind of like reminded me of like the Bengals, Bama corners, and like
yeah, I could see that.
And like it took Kirkpatrick a while to figure it out.
Yeah,
so that's a nice like roadmap for him.
I would probably say maybe more aggressive just because they're so conservative with their corners. I don't think Miami will be that conservative with them.
But it's also they would have better corners as well, so they didn't need to push guys.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So they're in a position of strength. Same with O-line as well. They're kind of same thing where they had good enough O-line that they didn't need to force guys to play. Ed, have you got any kind of like concerns going into like major concerns now going into which is pretty much going to be the look of the roster right now? They do have some money, but there's not really many free agents out there. With like the guard situation, the safety situation, the nose tackle situation, are those like the big flags for you?
I don't see. For me, safety's a long-term need for me, but it wasn't a position that I felt like they had to invest at in this class. Like I'm comfortable where they're at with safeties. It would have been great to nab one, and it will be great if they can get one. But I'm not really too concerned about it.
Does this reaffirm our position that they don't value safety as much as they maybe should?
Yeah.
And if people I kind of talked myself into it. Oh, maybe they do. Like they looked at a lot of day 2 safety, like early day 2 safeties or first round safeties. Maybe they have changed tack, but
that's what I thought too. Yeah,
clearly not, because off ball I would have as a lower priority than safety, both in need and just like quality around the league.
Agreed. I thought there was no chance they were taking a linebacker today. So obviously I was wrong. But and I would also add Bucky Hodges. I'd be really happy with him too.
That would just be funny to have him and Tankersley go up.
Oh yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, that makes for some fun.
Would you prefer Hodges or Leggett?
Hodges for sure. Just upside. Yeah, he's just gonna be an upside guy. I'm surprised. I'm a little bit surprised he's still on the board.
There's the tight end stuff's been weird. We started seeing like H-backs already go off. That happened last year though as well. This free agency with all the fullbacks going really early.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll be back. I don't think I will be able to do it tomorrow, but some point tomorrow or today. I don't know what day it is anymore. I think Sunday. It's 6 a.m. here, so I don't know what the hell's going on. But anyway, thank you for listening. And we'll be back tomorrow. You can follow Ian at NFL Film Study. Follow the show at MiamiPod. TheMiamiPod.com is where you can find all the other things. Goodbye.